The system does not announce its intentions. It does not stand in the open and declare, "I will keep you poor." Instead, it whispers, it persuades, it catechizes, and over time, it forms a people who believe they are choosing freely while walking carefully constructed paths. The first victory of the system is not debt, it is desire. Before wallets are emptied, hearts are trained. From an early age, people are taught to measure worth by ownership, joy by acquisition, and success by appearance. Patience is mocked, contentment is pitied, self-control is treated as repression rather than wisdom. In such soil, debt does not need to be forced. It grows naturally. When desire is ungoverned, spending becomes reflexive, and the future is quietly mortgaged to satisfy the present. What follows is a cruel irony. Debt is marketed as freedom. Borrow now, enjoy now, upgrade now. The language is liberating, but the outcome is constricting. Monthly obligations harden into chains, options shrink, risks become impossible, generosity becomes dangerous. A person with no margin cannot obey convictions that cost money. The system does not merely take resources, it takes agency. And a population without agency is easy to manage. Yet this condition is maintained not only by debt, but by distraction. The system hums constantly, screens glowing, feeds refreshing, trends cycling at dizzying speed. Silence is rare, reflection is uncomfortable, learning is postponed, discipline is deferred. People are kept tired enough not to ask deep questions, and entertained enough not to notice the pattern. Broke people are not just underpaid, they are overstimulated and underformed. And this leads to the deepest truth. True wealth is threatening. Not merely money, but the kind of wealth that brings freedom, the ability to say no, to give generously, to walk away from exploitation, to live with courage rather than fear. Such people cannot be easily manipulated. They cannot be rushed. They cannot be coerced by scarcity. A system built on dependency cannot afford too many truly free people. This does not mean individuals bear no responsibility, but it does mean the playing field is not neutral. Structures reward impulse over restraint, consumption over creation, debt over ownership. To remain broke is easy. To become truly wealthy requires resistance against habits, narratives, and assumptions that feel normal because they are everywhere. The system does not need to hate you to keep you broke. It only needs you to never slow down, never learn, never question, and never believe that another way of living is possible. The system shapes desire before it shapes debt because control over behavior is most effective when it begins at the level of the heart rather than the wallet. Long before people ever sign loan papers, swipe credit cards, or feel the weight of financial pressure, they have already been taught what to want. Desire is not neutral. It is learned, reinforced, and rewarded. When a system consistently elevates certain values, comfort over endurance, immediacy over patience, appearance over substance, it quietly forms people who will make predictable financial choices without being forced. The tragedy is that most individuals experience these desires as personal and spontaneous, never recognizing how carefully they have been cultivated. From childhood, the environment communicates that fulfillment is found in acquisition. Advertising does not merely present products, it presents identities. You are not buying shoes, you are buying confidence. You are not buying a phone, you are buying belonging. Over time, this repeated messaging fuses self-worth to consumption. To want less begins to feel like a moral failure rather than a virtue. Contentment is reframed as settling, and restraint is treated as deprivation. In such a framework, saying no does not feel wise. It feels like loss. The system does not need to command people to overspend when it has already convinced them that happiness depends on doing so. This shaping of desire also reorients time. The present moment is exalted and the future is discounted. "You deserve it now" becomes a moral claim rather than a marketing slogan. Delayed gratification, once a mark of maturity, is recast as unnecessary suffering. When the future is consistently devalued, debt becomes logical. Borrowing is not experienced as stealing from tomorrow, but as honoring today. The system benefits immensely from this inversion because people who do not protect their future will willingly surrender it. Debt, in this sense, is not the cause but the consequence of a heart trained to prefer immediacy. What makes this formation especially powerful is that it masquerades as freedom. People are told they are choosing what they love, expressing individuality, and exercising autonomy. In reality, their desires are remarkably uniform. Trends change, brands rotate, but the underlying hunger remains the same. The system does not care what you buy as long as you keep buying. Desire becomes a treadmill, always moving, never arriving. Satisfaction is intentionally short-lived, ensuring that consumption must be repeated to recreate the feeling it promised but could not sustain. This shaping of desire also erodes wisdom. When wanting becomes the highest authority, discernment is sidelined. Questions like, "Is this necessary?" or "Can I afford this?" feel intrusive and joy-killing. Emotional impulse replaces thoughtful evaluation. The system rewards speed, not reflection. One-click purchases, instant approvals, and frictionless payments are not conveniences alone. They are tools that bypass restraint. The less time a person has to think, the more likely they are to act on desire alone. Over time, the habit of reflection weakens, and financial decisions become reactive rather than intentional. There is also a moral dimension to this design. Responsibility is individualized while formation is ignored. When people struggle financially, the narrative focuses on poor choices without acknowledging how those choices were trained. Shame replaces understanding. This keeps individuals isolated and silent, believing their situation is unique or deserved. Meanwhile, the system that shaped their desires remains unquestioned. A person burdened with shame is less likely to challenge the structure and more likely to blame themselves while continuing the same patterns. Desire shaped by the system is also restless. It cannot tolerate stillness. Silence exposes emptiness, so noise must be constant. Entertainment, consumption, and novelty fill the gaps where reflection might occur. A restless heart spends easily because spending feels like movement, progress, relief. The system thrives on this restlessness because peace produces discernment, and discernment threatens profit. A content person is dangerous. A satisfied person cannot be easily manipulated. Therefore, desire must always be aimed just beyond reach. By the time debt enters the story, the battle is already largely decided. The heart has been trained to want more than it can sustain and faster than it can build. Debt simply formalizes a pattern that desire has already normalized. The system does not need to trap people financially if it can first convince them that fulfillment lies in endless acquisition. When desire is misaligned, financial collapse feels accidental rather than inevitable. This is why addressing broken finances without addressing shaped desire rarely works. Budgets fail when hearts remain unchanged. Discipline collapses when desire still rules. The system understands this deeply, which is why it invests far more in shaping longing than in enforcing debt. Control the loves, and behavior follows naturally. Shape what people worship, and you never have to tell them how to spend. Debt is presented as freedom because the system understands that no one willingly walks into chains. Bondage must be disguised as opportunity. Limitation must be dressed as access, and loss must feel like gain. The language surrounding debt is carefully chosen to appeal not to reason but to aspiration. Credit is framed as empowerment, loans as investments in the self, and borrowing as a sign of progress. The system does not say, "This will bind you," but rather, "This will open doors." And many of those doors do open, temporarily, before quietly closing behind the one who walks through them. At first, debt feels expansive. It allows people to live beyond their current capacity, to enjoy a lifestyle that has not yet been earned, to experience the future in advance. This creates a powerful emotional association between debt and possibility. The house, the car, the education, the business venture, all appear as evidence that debt is a tool for advancement. In this early stage, the cost feels distant and abstract, spread thinly across months or years. The system relies on this distance. Pain delayed is pain diminished, at least in perception. By the time the weight is fully felt, the commitment has already been made. What is rarely emphasized is that every form of debt carries obligation, and obligation always limits freedom. Monthly payments do not merely reduce income, they dictate choices. They determine where a person can work, what risks they can take, how much rest they can afford, and whether generosity is possible. A person in debt may appear free on the surface, but their life is quietly governed by numbers. Time is no longer fully theirs, it is pre-sold. Future labor is already assigned to past decisions. This is not freedom in any meaningful sense, but it feels like it, because the loss of freedom happens gradually, rather than all at once. Debt also introduces fear as a constant companion. The fear of missing payments, of losing assets, of unexpected expenses, of economic shifts. This fear narrows vision. People become more compliant, less willing to challenge unjust conditions, less likely to leave unhealthy environments. When survival depends on steady income, courage becomes expensive. The system benefits from this fear because fearful people are manageable. They prioritize stability over integrity, security over calling, and predictability over purpose. Debt does not merely affect finances, it reshapes character under pressure. The system further reinforces the illusion of freedom by normalizing debt. When everyone is carrying it, it no longer feels like bondage, but like adulthood. Questioning debt begins to sound naive or irresponsible. Those who avoid it are seen as overly cautious, unambitious, or out of touch. This social reinforcement is powerful. People are more likely to accept chains when they see them worn by the majority. Normalization dulls discernment. What should provoke concern instead produces comfort because it feels familiar. Another layer of this illusion is the separation of debt from consequence. Minimum payments obscure the true cost. Interest hides in percentages rather than lived experience. Statements reduce complex realities to manageable figures. The system is not lying outright. It is simplifying in ways that conceal gravity. People are encouraged to ask, "Can I afford the payment?" rather than, "What will this cost my life?" When decisions are framed narrowly, the answers appear reasonable. Over time, these narrow decisions accumulate into overwhelming constraint. Debt also shifts power away from individuals toward institutions. Creditors gain leverage, influence, and priority. The borrower becomes accountable not only to personal values but to contractual demands. This shift often goes unnoticed because it happens under the banner of choice. But freedom that requires permission is fragile. A person whose income is already spoken for cannot easily respond to opportunities or crises. They may have options on paper, but not in practice. Debt converts theoretical freedom into managed existence. Perhaps most damaging is how debt redefines hope. Instead of being rooted in patience, growth, and stewardship, hope becomes tied to leverage. People begin to believe that progress must be accelerated artificially, that waiting is failure, and that slow building is insufficient. This mindset keeps them dependent. Each new goal seems to require another layer of borrowing, another promise against the future. The system thrives on this cycle because it ensures long-term participation. A borrower who is always one step from relief will keep running, convinced that the next agreement will finally bring release. When debt functions this way, it becomes a form of quiet servitude, not enforced by violence but by obligation, not maintained by threat but by necessity. The system does not need to imprison bodies when it can obligate futures. People wake up each day free to move, speak, and choose, yet constrained in the most meaningful ways. Their choices orbit their debts. Their dreams are filtered through feasibility. Their generosity is calculated against survival. This is why debt must be examined not only financially but morally and spiritually. It asks the future to pay for the present, and then calls that arrangement progress. It promises freedom while demanding loyalty. It offers access while extracting autonomy. And because it delivers its benefits immediately and its costs slowly, many never recognize the trade until their margin is gone, their courage diminished, and their life quietly organized around obligations they once called opportunity. The system thrives on distraction because distraction keeps people from seeing clearly, thinking deeply, and acting intentionally. A distracted person is not necessarily ignorant, but they are fragmented. Their attention is constantly divided, their energy scattered, and their capacity for sustained focus weakened. In such a state, long-term discipline becomes difficult, if not impossible. Financial stability requires patience, planning, and restraint, all of which depend on the ability to slow down and evaluate reality. The system understands that if it can keep people perpetually occupied, it can prevent them from developing the habits that lead to freedom. Distraction fills every available space. Moments that once invited reflection, waiting, resting, commuting, even boredom, are now saturated with stimulation. Notifications, entertainment, and endless streams of content ensure that silence is rare. This matters because silence is where awareness grows. Without it, people move from impulse to impulse, responding rather than choosing. Financial decisions made in such an environment are reactive. Spending becomes a response to stress, boredom, or comparison rather than a considered act. The system does not need to push people toward poor decisions if it can simply keep them from thinking long enough to make good ones. Distraction also erodes the sense of time. Days blur together, weeks disappear, and years pass unnoticed. When time feels compressed, the future loses weight. Saving, investing, and long-term planning require an awareness of tomorrow that distraction steadily dissolves. The system benefits from this temporal blindness. People who cannot feel the future will not protect it. They will trade it easily for momentary relief or pleasure, unaware of the cumulative cost. Discipline, by contrast, depends on the ability to imagine and value outcomes that are not immediately visible. Another effect of constant distraction is emotional exhaustion. The mind was not designed to process endless information, opinions, and stimuli. When overloaded, it seeks the path of least resistance. Easy choices become attractive, even if they are costly. Convenience replaces discernment. This exhaustion makes people vulnerable to marketing that promises simplicity and ease. Just buy this, just sign here, just pay later. The system presents solutions that require minimal thought, knowing that a tired mind is unlikely to resist. Over time, this pattern trains people to outsource decisions rather than take responsibility for them. Distraction also fuels comparison. Curated images of success, wealth, and lifestyle flood the imagination, subtly redefining what feels normal and acceptable. People begin to measure their lives against highlight reels rather than reality. This breeds dissatisfaction and urgency. When everyone appears to be advancing, enjoying, and acquiring, standing still feels like failure. The system leverages this anxiety. Distraction keeps people looking outward instead of inward, chasing external validation rather than internal stability. In such a climate, financial discipline feels isolating, even shameful, because it often requires saying no to what others appear to be saying yes to. The noise of distraction also crowds out learning. True understanding of money, systems, and long-term growth requires sustained engagement. It takes time to read, study, ask questions, and reflect. Distraction fragments attention into short bursts, making deep learning feel tedious. People may consume large amounts of information without gaining wisdom. They know slogans but not principles. The system is not threatened by surface-level knowledge. It is threatened by understanding. A person who truly understands how money works is harder to manipulate. Distraction ensures that most remain informed enough to function, but not enough to challenge the structure. Distraction further undermines discipline by blurring cause and effect. When life is experienced as a series of disconnected moments, patterns are hard to recognize. Spending today and stress tomorrow feel unrelated. Debt feels sudden rather than accumulated. Without clarity, accountability fades. People struggle to connect their current condition to past choices, which makes change difficult. The system benefits from this confusion because it shifts attention away from structural patterns and toward isolated events. Problems are treated as emergencies rather than outcomes of ongoing habits. Even rest becomes distorted under distraction. True rest restores clarity and strength, but distracted rest merely numbs. Scrolling, binge-watching, and constant entertainment provide escape without renewal. People emerge from these activities not refreshed, but duller and less motivated. This creates a cycle where exhaustion leads to distraction, which deepens exhaustion. Discipline cannot survive in this loop. The system profits from it because tired people consume more and question less. Ultimately, distraction is not accidental. It is profitable. It keeps people busy enough to feel productive and entertained enough to feel satisfied, while quietly preventing the development of the inner life required for freedom. Discipline requires attention, intention, and endurance. These qualities grow in stillness, focus, and effort, conditions that distraction actively erodes. As long as people remain preoccupied, the system remains unchallenged, and financial brokenness is sustained not by lack of opportunity, but by the absence of clarity, patience, and resolve. True wealth is opposed not by accident but by design, because systems built on dependency cannot survive widespread freedom. Wealth, when understood rightly, is not merely the accumulation of money but the possession of margin, choice, stability, and the ability to act without fear. Such wealth allows people to refuse exploitation, to walk away from unjust arrangements, and to give generously without calculation. A system that depends on constant participation, constant consumption, and constant compliance finds this kind of freedom deeply threatening. Therefore, it quietly resists it while claiming neutrality. The resistance is subtle. The system does not openly attack wealth. It redefines it. Wealth becomes synonymous with appearance rather than substance, with spending rather than ownership, with lifestyle rather than liberty. People are encouraged to look wealthy rather than be free. This illusion satisfies the ego while preserving dependency. A person may live in a large home, drive an expensive car, and wear the symbols of success, yet remain financially fragile and highly controllable. The system is content with this version of wealth because it creates the impression of progress without the reality of independence. Structures are also arranged to reward dependency over self-sufficiency. Convenience is prioritized over resilience. Subscription replaces ownership. Renting replaces building. Access replaces stewardship. Each of these shifts seems minor in isolation, but together they form a pattern in which individuals rely increasingly on institutions for basic functions of life. Dependency feels easier at first, even wise, but it comes at the cost of leverage. When systems control access, they gain power. A truly wealthy person, one with low obligations and high margin, disrupts this balance by needing less and choosing more. True wealth also slows people down, and slowness is inefficient for systems built on speed. Wealth built patiently through discipline, restraint, and long-term thinking does not generate constant transactions. It does not require perpetual upgrades. It does not chase trends. The system prefers velocity over stability because movement generates profit. A person who is content and secure buys less, borrows less, and panics less. Stability is bad for business models that rely on urgency and dissatisfaction. Another reason true wealth is resisted is because it exposes alternatives. When people see others living simply, freely, and generously without being trapped in debt, it challenges the dominant narrative. It raises uncomfortable questions. If freedom is possible without constant consumption, then the system's promises lose credibility. To prevent this, wealth is framed as rare, risky, or morally suspect, unless pursued through approved channels. People are taught to fear independence, to believe that security only comes from institutional alignment rather than personal stewardship. Education also reflects this resistance. The system does not collapse because people are poor. It endures because brokenness feels normal and dependence feels inevitable. What keeps many trapped is not merely lack of opportunity, but a way of life carefully shaped, desires trained to crave what cannot satisfy, debt disguised as freedom, distraction celebrated as living, and true wealth quietly redefined until it no longer threatens the structures that profit from compliance. None of this operates loudly. It works best when unnoticed, when people assume the struggle is personal rather than patterned. Yet once the pattern is seen, it cannot be unseen. Awareness becomes an act of resistance. To question what you desire, to slow down in a world that demands speed, to refuse unnecessary debt, to pursue stability over appearance. These are not small choices. They are declarations of independence. They say that life will not be governed solely by urgency, comparison, or fear. They reclaim the future from the present and restore agency to places where it was quietly surrendered. True wealth begins where obedience to the system ends. It grows in patience, discipline, contentment, and courage. It is built slowly, often invisibly, but it carries weight because it produces freedom. Freedom to choose integrity over comfort, generosity over accumulation, and purpose over pressure. A person who lives this way may never dominate headlines, but they stand beyond easy control. The system may be powerful, but it is not ultimate. It relies on participation, and participation relies on belief. When belief changes, behavior follows. And when enough people choose clarity over distraction, stewardship over impulse, and freedom over illusion, the system loses its quiet authority, not through rebellion, but through refusal to be shaped by it any longer.